I want to talk about gun control. In the wake of these mass shootings, rampage killings, whatever you want to call them, there's more and more talk about stricter gun laws as well as disarming Americans altogether. I know this isn't my usual type of video, but I figured, what the hell? It's a pretty important topic to me, and I feel compelled to talk about it. Now, in this video, I'm going to be referencing the video Richard Vutek USA recently made on Trey Ware and Pastor Matt Hagee titled Outlaw Video Games to Stop Gun Violence. This isn't going to be a direct response, but I will be talking about certain points he made in his video. My intention isn't to defend Pastor Hagee. I don't think banning video games or violent video games is the answer, just like I don't think banning guns is. Now, Rich will tell you he's not against owning a gun, but he clearly states there's a problem with guns in America, and nobody's doing anything about it. It's super annoying. I'd say this seems to be the popular opinion nowadays, too. It's the gun's fault. Now pay close attention. The Second Amendment states that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I'm sure most of you have already heard this. What does infringe mean? Well, according to RefDesk Free Dictionary, infringe means to encroach, violate, or trespass. Further, encroach means to take another's possessions or rights gradually or stealthily. Now that means that any attempt to implement gun control is an attack on our Second Amendment rights. Why is it that any time someone loses their mind and attacks others with a gun, liberals immediately want to further limit or even eliminate my right to own and possess guns? People who commit the crime should receive the punishment for that crime. This is simple logic, people. I'm a responsible gun owner. I've violated no laws where its ownership, use, and possession are concerned. Think about this. Every year, thousands are injured or killed due to the irresponsible use of alcohol. I don't hear anyone calling for additional controls on the sale and distribution of alcoholic beverages, do you? Gun control logic would dictate that every offense directly attributable to the careless consumption of alcohol should be followed by national outrage against people that own rum and vodka. Perhaps we should be calling for a limit on the number of bottles of alcoholic beverages you can own and drink in any given period of time. Perhaps we should confiscate all alcoholic beverages. Let's face it, if no one could drink Captain Morgan, the world would be a much safer place now, wouldn't it be? Now, I got 1,000 other examples I could throw at you. You've probably heard most of them. But see, here's the thing. The problem with protecting people from harm is that you must infringe on their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in the process. Every step taken to eliminate risk of necessity limits freedom. Our Constitution and the amendments thereto were not drafted to limit risk. They were drafted to maximize and preserve our freedoms. If you want safety, we don't need a constitution. We just need an all-powerful government and a population willing to submit to its every whim, which I believe we're already headed toward rapidly. Now, if the government can take away, limit, or infringe on your right to keep and bear arms, then there is no right you have under the Constitution that cannot be similarly infringed by that same government. Now, at this point in time, let me add this. There's already numerous laws in place to address the responsible ownership and use of firearms. These include federal, state, local laws, and ordinances. Now, it seems to me that if the existing laws are not resulting in a safer society, what reasonable expectation can one have that the solution lies in yet more laws? Let's consider the words of Lyndon Johnson while he was President of the United States. He stated that we will eliminate poverty in our lifetime. Well, since about 1968, Washington has waged a war on poverty. That war has resulted in not less poverty, but more poverty and more government dependence by more people than at any time in American history. In fact, the cost of all social programs enacted to eliminate poverty has actually bankrupted the federal government. Even if the costs of the last 13 years of war in Iraq and Afghanistan were removed from the federal debt, we would still be under a mountain of unsustainable and unpayable debt. Social programs cost more than any single component of the federal budget, not including military spending. These programs and the resultant debt are the cost we have paid for the government to keep us financially safe. Let's take it further. Let's consider the words of Richard Nixon in 1971 when he declared drug abuse to be public enemy number one. In the 44 years that followed, it cannot be intelligently argued by anyone that there is less drug abuse and addiction in the United States than when the government's quote-unquote war on drugs began. In fact, the use of drugs is almost pervasive in our society. This war has overseen the passage of numerous pieces of legislation, the creation of numerous federal agencies, and the squandering of billions of dollars in foreign aid to governments to intercept the drug trade at its sources. I got news for you, people. It is all an abysmal failure. Drug cartels are actually in control of territory in Arizona, from the Mexican border to the outskirts of Phoenix. Local sheriffs are begging for federal intervention because they don't have the resources to fight the cartels on American soil. All of this was done to keep us safe from drug abuse and traffickers. Consider the Community Mental Health Act of 1963. The federal government I hate when I stutter. It began a process that would result in the large-scale deinstitutionalization of the mentally ill in America. Now, the law was conceived to combat mental illness in the United States. Though the law took decades to fully implement, the result translated into the community release of individuals who would have been in mental institutions. This release meant that the mentally ill would no longer be under supervision of healthcare workers. The program was aided by the availability of SSI, Social Security, and disability, and made possible with the advent of psychotropic drugs. Now, the idea was to treat the mentally ill with drugs in community rehab rather than house them in institutions. Well, many of the shooters in recent mass murders in the U.S. have a history of, you guessed it, mental illness. Now, the following is taken from an article by Sam Gerrans, an English writer, translator, support counselor, and activist, entitled "America is a Bomb Waiting to Explode." It reads, according to the Scientific American, use of antidepressants among the U.S. population was up 400% in the late 2000s over the 1990s. Many of these drugs are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. These are the type of FDA-approved narcotics lone gunmen are frequently associated with, and their psychosis often attributed to a forced or sudden withdrawal from such drugs. This correlates almost directly with the number of mass shootings over the same period of time. My father, he used to work in a mental institution. I remember him telling me it was always disturbing to him that people with these kinds of problems are living and just working among us, all the while being heavily medicated to control psychotic episodes. Is it unreasonable to think that yet one more government program designed to help Americans is quite possibly responsible for the death of Americans? When some of these clients go off their meds, lose control, and gain access to a gun? Now, at this point, I'd say if you're not convinced that the government's attempts to keep us safe routinely result in the opposite effect, then lobby for a change in the Constitution. Lobby for the repeal of the Second Amendment. This would be a legal way to effect the type of gun control you liberals seek. The Constitution was amended in 1920 with the 18th Amendment and the subsequent passage of the Volstead Act. This act ushered in prohibition in the United States and made the sale and distribution of alcoholic beverages illegal. Now, whether you agreed with the idea of prohibition or not, it was done legally and in accordance with provisions set up to amend the Constitution. The result of the amendment and the enabling legislation was a disaster for law enforcement and opened up a whole new world to organized crime. The amendment was subsequently repealed in 1933. Imagine that. So go for it. Let's see what happens. But stop advocating for the passage of laws and regulations that go against the clearly stated intent of the Constitution. We are a nation of laws. You may not like some of them, but we are all bound by them. Those laws are there to protect our liberties. By the way, if you hate guns, don't think people should own them, or just aren't interested in them, there's no constitutional imperative that you have to have one. I'll forever respect your decision to be gun-free. Now, old Rich of Review Tech USA makes the point that the Second Amendment... Hold on. Let me get into character here. The Second Amendment was written in 1791. The technology was totally different. You didn't have semi-automatic weapons, automatic weapons. They had no idea what kind of weapons they were going to have now. I'm not sure exactly what his point was here. But what's more deadly? one person with a 30-round magazine or 30 persons with 1 round each. If the Second Amendment is designed to protect your right to defend yourself, doesn't it make sense that as the technology evolves and the threat becomes more sophisticated, so should the means of defending against the threat? Is he suggesting that if I only owned a flintlock, he'd be okay with that? Then he asks the questions, Trey, have you ever read the Second Amendment? I'm going to read it to you. Now, as he reads, he adds emphasis to the wording, a well-regulated militia. Not any motherfucker with mental issues walking around. He further states that these super extremist conservative dudes like Trey Ware and Pastor Matt Hagee, when they talk about the Second Amendment, you'll never hear them bring up the well-regulated militia part of the Second Amendment. Now, it sounds to me like Rich is trying to marry the right to keep and bear arms to the maintaining of a well-regulated militia. Courts have ruled that the right of the people to keep and bear arms is separate from the right to maintain a well-regulated militia. Courts have already interpreted the Second Amendment to pertain specifically to the individual. Now I'd invite this constitutional expert to Google it and see if it's not so. I'll also add that most constitutional experts agree that the heart of the Second Amendment is protecting citizens, and listen closely, protecting citizens against tyrannical government overreach. His point that the prevailing technology at the time of the writing of the Second Amendment was fairly primitive should be viewed from the perspective of parity. Yes, the firearms of the day were muzzle loaders, but that was the same technology that the government possessed at the time. That is not the case today. From the standpoint of parity, citizens have lost significant ground as the technology has evolved. Consider the events at Waco in 1993. A standoff between federal and state law enforcement and the Branch Davidians saw the use of helicopters, tanks, and tear gas against private citizens. Now, though the compound contained numerous firearms, they were no match for the power brought against them by the government. It is somewhat puzzling to me that liberals, the current administration, continue to advance the notion that more controls on the use and ownership of guns will result in a more peaceful society while simultaneously supplying weapons to insurgents and rebels around the world. Now, it's a known fact the United States, the UK, France, Russia, and China are the world's largest suppliers of arms. These arms shipments have routinely gone to factions that have actually ended up killing Americans, as in the case of Brian Terry and the Fast and Furious scandal, to name just one. For those of you who don't know, he was a Border Patrol agent killed in the line of duty by weapons provided by the ATF. Or a weapon. If access and availability to guns is problematic, then it is universally problematic. It isn't problematic at the government's whim and discretion. Now, to me personally, that's what you call dictatorial and should be resisted vigorously. Furthermore, if access and availability to guns should be infringed for the public good, then it should be infringed for all of society. Often people cite Great Britain as a shining example of how wonderful and peaceful a society would be without guns. It should be noted, the police in the UK are not routinely armed either. However, while liberals advance more gun control rhetoric, police in the United States are becoming more and more militarized, and you damn well know it. It would seem that those in power believe that their safety is enhanced by additional firepower, while ours would be enhanced by less. Now, to me, this math does not compute. Many in the general public are as trained, if not more so, than police. The citizenry is filled with veterans, retired law enforcement, and people who have had extensive training at civilian shooting facilities. By the way, most states require some measure of training with a firearm prior to being licensed to carry. I would also suggest if you're going to make comparisons with other countries' success in gun confiscation, why don't you make those same comparisons with countries that have had disastrous results from gun confiscation, like Russia, China, Cambodia, and Cuba? These regimes were some of the bloodiest in history as those governments moved viciously against their political opponents who had no means to resist. Couldn't happen here, you say? Well, that kind of naivete commonly pervades our culture today. But see, the Founding Fathers knew it could happen here at any time. That is why they penned the Second Amendment. It is the only amendment that enables the citizen to resist the abrogation of all the others. Oh, listen to me. Listen, okay? No infringement on a constitutional right is done openly and notoriously and without warning people. It is done gradually, stealthily, and disguised with rhetoric and verbiage that sounds moral and caring. I personally believe that the ultimate goal of all the anti-gun rhetoric in the country at this time is to move public opinion to acceptance of gun confiscation. In fact, shortly after the shooting in Umpqua College in Oregon, Obama alluded to some of our allies that have already confiscated all firearms. And shortly after the Democratic national debate, Hillary Clinton also floated a trial balloon when she suggested that we should confiscate all firearms. It is amazing that a president and a candidate for president would suggest that criminal disregard for the Constitution they swore to uphold is acceptable and even desirable. Not only do words not mean anything anymore, but neither do laws. I do not accept the comparisons Obama makes with the United States and other countries. Our Constitution is unique in all the world, as is the concept of America and a free people. I'm not impressed by the fact that Norway only had one mass shooting in the last few years. I would not want to live in Norway, but if you feel safer there, then by all means, go. No veteran, evangelical Christian, or conservative Republican will stand in your way, and you will not be missed. That is because conservatives believe you should be free to think and speak as you wish, unlike liberals who are always demanding that you think and speak as they wish. Most conservatives don't care what you think and believe, while most liberals don't sleep well if their day has gone by without ramming what they believe down someone else's throat while screaming how tolerant they are. Now, another principle at the heart of the Second Amendment is the right to defend life and property from criminal threats. I've purposely avoided citing statistics in this argument because we all know you can say anything you want with statistics by manipulating the parameters of statistical sampling. I would like to exploit this one caveat, however. Consider the following statistics from the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice. Property crime facts. According to the FBI in the U.S., www.fbi.gov, one property crime happens every 3 seconds. One burglary occurs every 10 seconds. One violent crime occurs every 20 seconds. One aggravated assault occurs every 35 seconds. One robbery occurs every 60 seconds. One forcible rape occurs every 2 minutes. There were over 2 million burglaries in 2005. An increase in burglary offenses was the only property crime to increase in 2005 compared with the prior year data. Home invasion facts. According to the United States Department of Justice report, 38% of assaults and 60% of rapes occur during home invasions. 1 of every 5 homes will experience a break-in or home invasion. That's over 2 million homes. According to Statistics Canada, there has been an average of 289,200 home invasions annually over the last 5 years. Statistically, there are over 8,000 home invasions per day in North America. According to Statistics USA, there was an average of 3,600,000 home invasions annually between 1994 and 2000. Against this backdrop of criminal activity in the U.S., it is unconscionable to me that anyone would want to restrict, limit, or eliminate my ability to protect myself and my family. You know what? Forget about me. How about my 5'2" wife that's home alone with my 2 beautiful children while I work the late night shift? She's no match physically for your typical home invader, rapist, knockout game perpetrator, whatever. What about your loved ones? What about your parents? Do you sleep better knowing they're utterly defenseless in the event they're attacked in their home and the police are 15 minutes away? In 10 to 15 minutes, your loved ones could be robbed, bludgeoned to death, and the perpetrators would still have time to be long gone. Because with no guns, your criminals are going to be the only ones running around with them. That and the police. Now look, a gun's no guarantee anyone would survive such an attack. But I'm not an American who's asking for the government to guarantee anything for me. I don't want a guaranteed outcome. I just want the right and the opportunity to protect our lives and our home. A right that, the last time I looked, was still guaranteed by the Constitution. Lastly, I would like to speak about the emotional and behavioral impact of so-called violent video games. I don't believe that playing Call of Duty induces or predisposes any normal person to violence any more than the presence of a firearm predisposes a normal person to go on a shooting rampage. I suppose that there's a segment of the population that acts out things they see in entertainment media, while the vast majority of us can differentiate reality from fantasy. If external stimuli can cause us to act a certain way with any degree of reliability, then poverty would cause us to steal. Seeing a naked woman would cause us to rape. Watching a movie that contains drug use would cause us to be drug addicts. Clearly, this is not the case for all but the most unstable among us. That's to be debated. Now, Rich made the point that we need to do something about guns in America, but the idea that video games was training kids to use AR-15s was absurd. Now, in my mind, it's just absurd to say the NRA only wants to increase gun sales and profits for gun manufacturers, no matter how much harm and death and terror it will cause, as though the mere sale of guns causes people to go on shooting rampages. Very, very, very poor logic. That's like saying automobile dealerships just want to sell cars and make money no matter how many people die on America's highways every year. There's no cause and effect here. One has nothing to do with the other. By the way, I'm personally not troubled or offended if the firearms industry is profitable. That is why they are in business. Then, in typical liberal fashion, Rich goes on a name-calling spree. Fuck you fucking idiots! This is a hallmark of liberal argument, generally lean on facts and replete with disparaging, belittling comments about people that hold opposing points of view. Sadly, in America today, it's becoming increasingly difficult to have an intelligent debate on issues of the day. But, whatever. Now, I'm going to close this up. And the link in the description is going to be, well, the first link is going to be to Rich's video. The second is going to be a chart provided by MSNBC. Now, this chart depicts mass shootings in the past 65 years. Now, I want you to pay close attention to it because between 1966 and 84, there was only one mass shooting, and there were less gun laws then than there is now. It also states that half the deadliest shootings in U.S. history occurred in the last 6 years. Could this not be better associated with the moral breakdown of America's youth? How about the moral breakdown of America, period? How many teenagers are growing up fatherless? Being raised by God knows who, playing Call of Duty, watching porn all day while taking God knows what medication, for God knows what reason, so nobody has to deal with them. You can't discipline them no more. Factor that in with the fact that they're all spoiled, rotten brats that are so used to getting their own way with little to no concept of personal responsibility. This, however, that's only an opinion. Another topic for another time, another place. I appreciate you guys watching. Just remember, you can say anything you want with statistics, so, whatever. Remember in Rich's chart, he didn't even factor in population. Norway's got a population of 5 million. To what? The U.S. is 314 million? Seriously? Okay. Anyways, that's it. Dragged on long enough. Have a nice day.